All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I was going to say good morning, but we're in the afternoon today. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first session. Um, so this is just a little overview of how to work Zoom. If anybody does have any questions specific to Zoom, please let us know. I, for one, am very, very knowledgeable about Zoom, or at least I try to be, because I spend a lot of my life on Zoom. So please feel free to ask questions. But because this is such a small group, we definitely encourage everybody, if you can, to have your cameras on and to just mute or unmute yourself if you can. If you don't feel comfortable, you can always use the chat box and we'll definitely be monitoring that. But there's only going to be at most 8 participants. About 7 people had registered. Right now we have about 3 participants on, so my hope is that more people will come on. But we do encourage everybody, if you can, to have your camera on and unmute. So our first session is going to really focus on housing and working with landlords and landlord relationships. As I'm sure all of you know, we're in a housing crisis right now here in New Jersey. And I know a lot of people are struggling, which is why I'm very happy to have my cohorts here from Cc Housing, who are going to lend a lot of really great perspective to that. Before we go into introductions, though, I am just going to talk a little bit about Mhttc. So the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center receives 5 years of funding. So the initial funding was given in 2018. It will end in 2023. And it's designed to enhance the capacity of behavioral health force workers to be able to deliver evidence-based practices to individuals with mental health conditions. It's also to help to address the full continuum of services spanning mental illness prevention, treatment, recovery supports, and then train related workforces. So police, first responders, primary care providers, vocational services. So the funding really encompasses a lot of training for a lot of different individuals. And then they also received supplemental funding for school teachers and healthcare providers and wellness and self-care activities. If you have not gone onto the Mhttc website, I really recommend that you do. I can put the link in the chat box, but they have a lot of webinars that are on demand that you can view, as well as live webinars that you can sign up for, ranging on a variety of topics. And if it's not something that you might not necessarily be interested in, it might be something that your staff might potentially be interested in. So just to go over some light housekeeping, we do recommend, again, that you connect to audio so that you can mute and unmute yourself. If you can have your video on, we definitely ask that you do. You can use the chat or unmute yourself to answer questions. And then the recording the presentation, I will be sending that out at the end of our session today, sometime today, but the video will be posted on the Mhttc website. And that's okay. Is it Aubrey or is it Audrey, or can you just clarify how to pronounce your name so we're not saying it incorrectly? As someone who's been called Emil most of my life, I really try to get people's names correct because my name's Emily and I really don't like being called Emil. So if you can let us know how to say your name, that would be completely helpful. And then just to kind of establish some group norms. So the group that we have and that we're starting out with is going to be the group that we're going to have for the next 3 sessions, including this one. Okay, Aubrey, thank you. So we do want to make sure that any comments are respectful and related to the topic at hand. And we do encourage everyone to engage in the discussion topics. Today is really going to be very conversational and is really going to require you all to lend your perspective. So we really encourage everybody to either unmute yourself and engage in the conversation or do so through the chat box. But we're really hoping for a lot of participation today. And we do have a diverse crowd here. We have supervisors, we had a property manager sign up, we have I think an HR person sign up. We have a lot of different perspectives here. And so we're very diverse. So we want to make sure that we're hearing everybody's voices. So for our presenters, I will refer first over to my colleagues at Mhttc from Mhttc Housing so that they can briefly introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I am Leslie Small, Director of Clinical Services. Been with Mhttc Housing for 11 years now, or about to be 11 years. And I'm looking forward to this series. So hopefully I can help add to everyone's knowledge and also take and learn from everyone else here.
Thank you, Leslie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly Ewell. I am the COO with Mhttc Housing. I am actually 9 days shy of 25 years with Mhttc. And I have been in, I believe, almost every position at the agency, worked in every department. So I am really excited that you guys are joining us, just hoping that we can have a really robust discussion today and hope that we can provide some information to you all. Thanks. Thanks, Adrian.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marcus Kellum, Director of Community Engagement and Development with Mhttc Housing. I am the new kid on the block. I have been with the agency for just over 2 years. I oversee all of our housing production and development, our property management team, as well as our facilities maintenance. And I also work with a lot of our external partners, in particular developers, to create strategic partnerships for not only housing development, but also the provision of services at some of their developments. Excited for today.
Thank you, guys. And my name is Emily Vans. I work for Rutgers School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My primary role here in the department is to provide training and technical assistance to community support services / supportive housing providers in New Jersey. So if you are a community support services housing provider, your staff probably attend my training. We do a 9-week training series for CSS direct care staff, clinicians, supervisors, RNs, et cetera, et cetera. And then myself and my colleague Earl, we also provide technical assistance to agencies. In addition to that, I'm also a licensed professional counselor. And prior to coming over into Rutgers, I actually worked in supportive housing. I started working in supportive housing back in 2013, and then transitioned over into Rutgers in 2019. So although I am familiar with supportive housing and how it worked back in when I was working there, a lot has changed, and I continuously learn from Leslie, Marcus, and Kimberly. I don't know why I called you that, Kim. I called you that, Kim. I'm reading your name. I continuously learn from Leslie, Marcus, and Kim because they're really updating me on everything that's happening in the supportive housing world right now and all the challenges that are happening. So that's a little bit about us. So if you do want to receive any more information about trainings for MHTTC, once you get the PDF of this PowerPoint, this will be a clickable link that you can click and it'll direct you to be able to subscribe. All of their trainings are free. And again, a lot of it is on demand and you can kind of just watch at your own pace and at your own leisure. So you can subscribe to that. And then also, they like feedback. So any feedback you can give us would be really, really helpful. There is going to be an evaluation at the end of the training that I will put in the chat box. And any feedback you can give us would be very, very helpful. And then again, this is going to be posted on the MHTTC website. This is a disclaimer. And then this is more for when they're in webinar mode. We're in a meeting mode, so we don't really need this. And this is just to state that the MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. And this is 100% applicable to the conversation we're going to have today. So we want to make sure that we're speaking in a strengths-based and hopeful way. We're being inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, that we're healing-centered and trauma responsive, inviting individuals participating in their own journeys, using person first and free of labels and non-judgmental, and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, understandable, and consistent with our actions, policies, and products. Okay, so now that I have gotten through all of that housekeeping, which I feel I did relatively quickly, so I'm very proud of myself for that. We want to do an icebreaker just to kind of get to know all of you. And since we are very focused today on housing and working with landlords, we were wondering, what is everybody's craziest experience, quote unquote craziest experience you have had with a landlord? So what is the most out of the blue experience you've had when working one-on-one specifically with a landlord?
Should I start?
Go ahead, Kim.
So I think, and Leslie Small will probably recall who I'm talking about as I start to describe the situation. We had a consumer, we have vouchers that we partner with another housing provider. We provide the services, and as a part of that grant, which is a part of HUD's Continuum of Care programming, we were required for this grant to actually co-sign the lease with the tenant, which we did. Just disclaimer, we no longer have that grant at this time. We learned the hard way that we should not co-sign with other tenants on their leases. So this was truly a learning curve for us, but we did co-sign that lease. The tenant moved in and again, was doing great, but then began to have some issues. I'll condense a lot of the issues that occurred to narrow it down to, there were a few instances of alleged arson that the consumer was engaged in. We worked, I see Leslie Small nodding now, so you probably know what I'm talking about at this point. We did work closely with the landlord in terms of, you know, trying to meet the tenant where they were. We also, again, in terms of wanting to support and work with the landlord, we did take on the expense of getting security to help secure the property for a couple of months. And again, our staff providing the services to that individual, we're working with the individual. And eventually it just got to the point, because the location where the tenant lived was actually a condo association. So the landlord was a part of the condo association, and the other members of the condo association really became up in arms and wanted the tenant gone because there were 2 instances of arson that occurred, alleged arson. We worked, again, closely with the landlord to work to, you know, have the tenant relocated. And once that happened, the landlord actually, we got served with papers from the landlord because they were looking to sue us for the damages, for back rent, and all of the other financial burdens he assumed based on the tenant association blaming him for all of their issues. So we had a great relationship with the landlord. Again, we were the ones who decided to jointly, we would, you know, get the security and work to, you know, move the tenant on so that he would no longer, you know, have these issues. And yes, he did end up serving us with papers, which again, in consultation with our attorney and the things that we did, we just gave him $1,500 after he was asking for about maybe 10,000 plus for damages, yes, back rents, again, and all of the documentation that we had. He had been paid the rent from the subsidy provider. He did not receive the tenant's portion, and we explained that the tenant is, responsible for that portion, so the landlord would have to go after the tenant for that. But yeah, I really condensed that. That went on for what, 10 months?
A long
Yeah,
time.
it was quite some time. So yeah, that's my craziest landlord story.
That's
And
intense.
probably Leslie's too.
One of my craziest landlord story is very, very brief, but also very crazy. It's not landlord per se, but the property manager at the site. We used to provide services at this place in New Brunswick that people rented. And one day I went to check on a consumer, and the property manager was there to let me in. And on the way to the consumer's apartment, he stopped off at another apartment to buy crack. Yeah.
I'm actually wondering how. I'm thinking it's probably more common than we actually care to admit some of these things.
Probably. Yeah. That I was shocked and flabbergasted
But
at
how
that
did you
point.
find out? Did he tell you? I just wanted to go get
No.
some crack.
No, he was walking with me, stopped in the hallway, knocked on the door. The person opened the door, handed him something, and he handed the person money. Yes.
Oh, good. All right. Well, he trusts you enough, I guess. That's good.
Right, you are a witness, and
I am a trustworthy person,
Apparently.
I guess. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Anybody else had any crazy experiences? I love Talia's face right now.
Well, I guess. Well, hi. I'm Adriana Chazan, director for Southeast Region, a collaborative support programs of New Jersey, also an LPC. And I'm trying to think because, like, I can't remember. Like, to me, crazy. I'm thinking like something so out of the ordinary and so like silly. I can't think of any of those. I know I've had them, but we've had like the jerky landlords and all of that. And I'm gonna have to get back to this because when I worked in Miami, so we had some of the best stories there because it's a whole different world in there. Like it's not involved goats and chickens and all sorts of like weird things that you just don't want to talk about. So I got to think about something really good because it didn't come back then. It wouldn't have been like out of the ordinary because this is the norm. So I got to think, but I've got some really good ones. So I've got to think and share some of them because they're more comical, creepy, but comical at the same time. I'll never forget, like when I first moved down there and I walking along and one of my colleagues and I heard something and I'm like, what is that? Like, I was like, is there a zoo around here? He's like, no, because we're like in downtown, like Miami. And he's like, no, of course. I'm like, I hear a goat. I hear a goat. Goes, oh yeah, they're everywhere. I'm like, goats? And then like a herd of chickens just ran across the street, downtown Miami. Freaking. I'm like, what are they doing? He's like, you don't want to know. Eventually I learned. But I mean, some of them are pets. Some of them are food. Some of them are part of, rituals and the such. Like, wow. God bless. So I'll come up with some good ones.
that's interesting.
Goats as pets in the middle of a city.
Oh yeah. Some of, a lot of them, they're used for other things, but a lot of them keep them as goats as pets. The main ones were goats and the chickens, but the goats, like talking like city. Just like if you're walking down like in the middle of Atlantic City, just right there. Like nothing. Cute, actually.
It's
Were they
interesting
friendly?
that the categories you place them in, pets, food, you know.
Yeah, they were, yeah. 'Cause, I mean, to me, I like to think of them as pets, you know, and that was the best way that I could really process it, because it was very, very different going in there and like learning what a lot of, because you know, in Jersey we don't have goats running around ever, or for the most part we have them in the petting zoo, and so yeah, I had to ask because they're very predominant. They're very normal. And chickens, you know, so like goats, food, mainly for pets and rituals actually, particularly the chicken. Chickens a lot were used for something else.
I'm just flabbergasted at the goat as a pet.
I
Yeah.
have a goat as a pet.
But why wouldn't? Why wouldn't? They're cute.
I mean, you know, as a person from the Caribbean, food I get, right?
Yeah.
Ritual I get, just from a multicultural perspective. But a pet in the middle of a city, I don't get.
Well, because they roam. It's not like you know, we think about we have a dog and we keep the dog with us. They're out in the street. Like they might let their pet goat out walking around, like, you know, like
They're
where I
free
am, like,
range.
yeah, they're just out there. So they come back home. It's like just a whole unique thing. It's like normal. You see the goats out there.
So so you walk in the wrong neighborhood, you might get attacked by a stray goat.
You walk in almost any place. Yeah, you can't. I've never been attacked by the goats. I mean, the chickens were, yeah, but never had the goats. The goats were actually pretty calm. I mean, like, it's like the deer, like here in Jersey, you take away the deer, put them there. So, wow, you know, like in your parkway and you see them, but I mean, probably not as many because I mean, there's an extraordinary amount of deer, but yeah, the goats.
That's
Wow.
interesting.
And to be honest, I mean, I'm sure some people probably told me it was a pet and something else. I don't know, but yeah, it was, yeah. But they were cute. That was culture shock. But I got to think of, because there were some good stories.
I wonder if
Miami
they're,
was great.
well, I wonder if those are, I guess, allowable pets then for landlords. Like if they would let somebody have a goat or a chicken on their property, if that.
Things are different in Miami. There's a lot of people don't even have the lease. They just like live there. It's not as business like, I guess, or more as corporate. So especially because it's a lot of like backdoor kind of renting out and kind of just like on your word kind of a thing, and whether it's there or not, people allow it. It's a very different culture. It's very, very, very different culture. It's more like when you get into some of like into like, let's say South Beach, something like that. Like that's where I live, and like some of like the bigger, like the fancier buildings where, you know, you have the tourists. Now we're talking about tourists now in there, a lot of it, and money, like it's a lot of money right there. Then, you know, you're not going to have a goat in South Beach, but just down mid beach or further, a little bit more, you will. It's just a whole different culture, like you wouldn't believe. Totally different.
That's interesting. It's
Yeah.
it sounds very different than New Jersey. Very, very different.
It's like nothing. Once you get away from the touristy part, like Miami, it's oh my gosh, it's so multicultural. It's so different. All the different languages, the different food, like the combination of religions. It's something. It was like culture shock, and it's something that was really interesting. I mean, I lived there for almost my whole adult life, and it was really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Well, hopefully you remember a interesting landlord story.
I will. I have to say, yeah, because I mean, it was just so commonplace.
I'm sure it's there.
Oh yeah.
Does anybody else have any landlord stories? I think for me, and this isn't even that, it's definitely does not rival anything that Kim or Leslie talked about. And it wasn't even my story, it was one of my staff's story. But just going weren't even at the point where we were renting with this person. My staff were just calling this landlord to see if they would accept one of our individuals. And as soon as she told the landlord that he had the housing voucher, the rent went up by like $5. So it was like 12, it was like, I mean, this was like a couple years ago. So I think at the time it was like 1090 something in Union County was fair market. And it was like 1090 and then it went up to like 1100. And like,
He put it up so the person would be disqualified?
yeah, but my staff like fought with him. My staff was like, you can't do that. This is illegal. You can't do things, click. And that was it. And that was it. And like, I was so proud of her for advocating in that way and like calling the landlord out on that. But it was just so blatant. So blatant that is something that is still stuck with me to this day, because I've never had an experience like that where you're calling and the person's fine. Yeah, sure, come meet. This is the rent. This is the amount. Okay, great. We have a housing voucher. No, I'm sorry. I read the number wrong. It's this much now. Oh, I guess you don't qualify. Okay, bye. It was just very, very blatant discrimination. So that's my wildest story. I don't know if anybody has anything else.
Come on, you guys, I know we worked in this field for a while, so we gotta have some kind of stories. Come on.
And if you don't have a story, if you also could just introduce yourself and let us know where you're from.
Yes.
I can do that. I don't really have I'm Talia Alexander Shop, long last name. From JFS, I'm a supervisor of CSS, or one of them. Only been in this role for a little bit. So this is my 1 month in this particular role. Prior to that, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I did outpatient therapy. And then prior to that, I worked at Ancora. So I know Cc. You referred to. But yeah, but I can't think of any like direct contact that I've actually had with the landlord, other than just the trying to get things fixed and, you know, like those like regular submitting work orders. Sometimes it's frustrating. So I have frustration stories, but not necessarily like crazy experiences, or have I had that kind of contact. Now my personal life maybe, but not not within my role here. But yeah, but that's me.
Well, thank you for sharing. And we will not ask you to share anything personal, though we amongst ourselves, when we were planning this, had some very interesting conversations about personal issues with landlords. And I don't know if this was the case for you, but we also talked about how working in this field actually prepared us to have certain conversations in our personal lives with landlords, because we have all these different experiences. So thank you so much for introducing yourself and welcome. Latanya, I think you had unmuted yourself.
Yes, I was just going to introduce myself. I don't really have any crazy stories either, or I'm kind of maybe numb to them now. But I'm Latonya Gibson. I work for Legacy Treatment Services, and I'm the housing support specialist.
Okay. Very nice to meet you and very nice to have you. And Aubrey, did you just want to let us know where you're from also and what your position is at your agency? Oh, okay, cool. So you're the director of supportive housing at Cody. Very nice to meet you. So any other stories before we move on into what we have for some content and discussion today? No. All right, so then I will progress and send it over to Kim.
Actually, can I say
Thanks.
one thing real quick?
Sure.
We're talking like all these crazy ones seem to be kind of bad. I want to say I've had some really good relationships with landlords. Now that I saw that, one that I'll always will remember is, again, this was one in Miami, and the landlord was almost like a father figure to the person who lived there, and was just so involved. Now, I think those of us on this call, so please take this with a grain of salt, everyone. So we've been in this field long enough that what I'm saying is not offensive, but you get what I'm saying. So she was just like crazy. So she was like one of those that like all over the place, like funky to the South Beach. So like all over the, like, really flamboyant fun. And so, sometimes it was hard to rein her in. And so it was just really cute because the landlord was this like much older, straight-laced man who had like this, because she was like British and tiny and like bright hair all over and just everywhere. And so very cute, and how he was just so nice with her, and he would call me, and just so calmly, like, yeah, like Mary Jane just, took out her pet squirrel for a walk now, and I'm worried because she's wearing her buzzard hat, and I think she's trying to set it on fire or something. And he would just be so calm and just so cute, and he was just really nice to see. So when I saw a relationship, we just talked about some crazy, not good ones, but I think I know I've personally been blessed to work with some really wonderful ones as well, who took on the folks we serve almost as family, because it's been there for so many years. So, and I'll be quiet now.
No, Adriana, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think there are so many, I guess, negative stories that it can almost overwhelm the, different positive relationships that I know a lot of providers do have with certain landlords. And that individual that you were speaking about sounds incredibly interesting if she was walking a pet squirrel. I'm just imagining like a little like collar and leash and
yes, she did. She made a little like a body leash for the little squirrel. And yes, there's a squirrels.
This wasn't imaginary squirrel. This was
no, it was real. It was real.
Oh.
Miami's a whole different world. I just can't emphasize that enough.
We got pet goats and pet squirrels.
Yep. She has a squirrel.
Like, like in Jersey, we have cats and dogs, right?
Yes.
And in Jersey, it's weird when you see somebody walking their cat, which I have seen.
Oh yeah.
And it is weird.
Oh no, that's normal there. That's so normal. I mean, when I lived there, I got a leash from my cat. No, I mean, he wouldn't do it because he's a normal cat. But no, yeah. Actually, they put a lot of them in the strollers. A lot of the cats and some of the dogs go in the stroller. Huge.
I've seen the dog in the stroller. My mom loves her dog more than anything, and I have seen her go somewhere with the dog in the stroller, and I'm like, Mom, really?
Oh.
You really? Okay.
No, you will find all the designer strollers there. I mean, people walking around with their boas and pretty boas, like accessories, but the snakes, all types of exotic birds, you name it. People walk around with a lot of different wildlife in Miami, and the relationship, because Miami is different, has a lot of different culture. Like I said, it's not as corporate, so a lot of the relationships with the landlords were different. It was some of it was more family, very informal. So it was unique. It was so unique. My favorite was the pet squirrel, though. I mean, I just loved them. The squirrel and those two together, they were good.
Pet squirrels and pet goats.
Yeah.
I need to go to Miami.
You do. Seriously.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Adriana, because I think it's always good to end on a good note. And if we could talk about Miami all day, I think we honestly could, because I can tell that Leslie and I and Kim were very interested. I know, but I'm like, I have questions. I have so many questions.
Anytime anytime, I'm here. Like I said, my whole adult life, right there.
I do, yeah. It sounds like an interesting place to live. Very different though from New Jersey.
Completely different.
So it's,
Completely different.
but it's interesting that you share that with seeing, the topic of building relationship with landlords. And I think, again, the slides that we put together today, we do want to, have a lively discussion with everyone, because we want this to kind of be an interactive process where we're kind of learning and sharing information that will help, improve. As Emily said in the beginning, there's a housing shortage, housing crisis in New Jersey. COVID, complicated that with the, amount of people who just were at home and everyone needed to have housing, and the storms that we've had with people, migrating from different parts of the country, into New York and New Jersey. So yeah, I mean, the housing market kind of, I think we're finally seeing the prices of houses drop. But again, all of that impacts the availability of, I hate to say this word because it doesn't go hand in hand, affordable housing in New Jersey, because it's an oxymoron to say that. But I think in working with the populations that we work with, it really is important to kind of build a relationship with the landlord. Even in the example that I provided with the landlord that we worked with, we built a relationship with that landlord, which is why he felt comfortable calling us and reporting some of the things that, occurred with the tenant that was there. And that really begins in the beginning, when, at the point where you identify a unit, and that person has been accepted into, the housing, you want to begin to partner with the landlord, find out who they are, what their experience is with housing. And this landlord did portray himself as being experienced, but did tell us at the very end that this was his first rental property. And yeah, I think it's unfortunate that it wasn't a great experience for him. But we did, partner with the individual, and, provided the landlord with our contact information so that he was able to reach out to us, sort of similar to what Adriana was speaking of, that they would call and say, so-and-so doesn't look like they're having a good day, or, they were seen, or another tenant, notice X, Y, and Z. But it's really critical, specifically with the, various individuals that we work with, to really get to know who the landlord is. Even if they're familiar with the subsidy process, sometimes they do use it against the tenant to, as Emily said, raise the rent above the, fair market rent for the type of and size of unit. But I think it's just really key to definitely, build that relationship as the provider to the landlord, but also to encourage, the person moving in to build a good relationship with the landlord. Providing them with, the after hours numbers and who they can contact or call if anything happens, so that the person doesn't feel that they're, renting to someone and they then discover, okay, there's something different about this person. I now feel like I was, duped into renting to someone, and now I'm going to have an issue on my hands. So before they kind of, develop this stigma, or they kind of prejudge the tenant, I think it's really good to kind of put that information out there and just be upfront. And I think one of the other slides, and we talked about this with the first set of sessions that we did in terms of disclosure and how much information the potential tenant should share. So I just want to open it up because, again, I don't want to talk and monopolize everything, but I guess, what are some of the processes at your agencies that your staff engage in to kind of build relationship with landlords? Or is this something that isn't really formalized and something that, you know, you think is important or key to kind of build into the process?
Well, for us, it's not like it's formal in the sense we have a policy per se, but it's our practice that when, I mean, we always try to engage folks, especially right now, since housing, we, you know, folks we serve, and if we're lucky enough that there are families involved, just get out. If you see something, just go in and start take a look. You know, if they have that, you know, finesse of doing that, then do it. So taking this crisis situation away in a normal time, so to speak, what we would love to do is maybe go in, you know, walk with the person. That way we're there for support. Some folks like to do it on their own, that's fine, but we like to build that rapport with the landlord or the property manager. And just, you know, we don't first start saying like, hi, my name is Adriana and I'm this person's support worker or anything. It's just, hi, we're just here to look, just like we were just two pals or two whatever, and go in. And then we started, you know, asking the questions and the such, and then, you know, eventually we have to bring up a voucher and say, hey, do you accept like Section 8 type of vouchers, kind of very generic, so we can get that conversation to make it easier. And then if they start having other questions, that's when we start adding on, you know, and of course, if the person gives consent, the person starts to consent, who we are. And you know, that just like you were saying, Kim, that we're here for support. We have after hours, the whole to do. That happens more, I think, for like the smaller apartments and dwellings, like where maybe someone who just has like 1 or 2 apartments, or like they own a house with a duplex, something like that. The bigger places, kind of like whatever Section 8, yeah, they don't fit. It's a norm for them. So we do that. What we're also been trying to do is just to get out and meet landlords and property managers in general, just to say, hi, my name is Adriana, I'm from CSP. We're just trying to get a relationship working with people, with those buildings, you know, that way they know us, that they trust it, they see we're professional, someone they can call on, maybe, you know, they can, and some folks really, some owners love the voucher because they know it's a guaranteed payment. Some hate it, but they know it's a guaranteed payment. So they might call us and we need any kind of in. That's kind of what we try to do. And we're always there in case there's any issues. Please, like you said, we give them our number. They have the office number that it can call at any hour and get transferred to on-call as needed. So it's all about that relationship building, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Aubrey is having some technical issues, but she put in the chat, communication is key to building a relationship. However, many landlords have been frustrated with, I'm assuming that supportive housing connection. I think everyone's familiar with that entity. We tend to help the landlord navigate and advocate for client and landlord with supportive housing connection in hopes not to lose a good relationship with the landlord. Yes. I think some of our staff have also voiced that the supportive housing connection isn't always great with follow-up, turnaround time, getting documents. I'm not familiar with the SS4 form, but it sounds like something that may be needed probably to, is that the one that guarantees what the rent amount is or verifies what the rent amount is? Or is that the landlord form? Oh, okay, a tax form. So yeah, our staff have expressed frustrations at times, unfortunately, with the supportive housing connection. And again, I don't want to, you know, spend too much time on, you know, communicating with some of the woes with interacting with supportive housing connection, but that can impact a relationship that the tenant as well as the provider has with the landlord, because they're assuming that, you know, there is guaranteed a portion of the rent, but when there are, you know, the documents that aren't being completed and things aren't done in order for the landlord to be paid, then yeah, it becomes difficult because you want to kind of maintain a positive relationship, but you have this kind of outside entity that's interfering with your ability to really, you know, maintain a positive, open line of communication. So I know we do have one staff that has a point of contact with someone at Supportive Housing Connection to kind of ease some of those concerns and questions when they come up. But I think partnering, you know, with the subsidy holder or whoever is paying the, if they have a subsidy, who's paying the majority of the rent, to develop a relationship with that entity as well. So that, there aren't any issues with delayed payments, which would then cause the landlord to not want to continue to rent. Anyone else have want to share what their agency does in terms of their process for building a relationship, or something you think you may do differently moving forward?
So, hi. So, I think it depends with JFS how we get the referral, whether it's coming from the hospital and how we engage the landlord with the client. Whether it's coming from the hospital, obviously we can't do too much with them and introducing them to the landlord, and the way in which we go about searching for housing is going to be a little different than if the referral came from the community. But generally we have some contacts with them because we do Atlantic County and Cape May County only. So we have a couple contacts that we work with specifically for maybe a little bit more difficult cases, or with background history or credit reports that might not be as favorable. So we have some relationships already established with those who will be a little bit more lenient for that. And then it's just like Adriana had said, and kind of going through, like, searching with, going online and searching what anybody else would do to find those landlords and those connections, and being as professional as we can. I think being straightforward with, okay, this is where the payment's coming from, is really important too, because we don't want it to kind of kick back after you've done all that work to get it set and ready, and then all of a sudden something happens, and then you have to start all over. So I think that has worked for the agency, but it's still really difficult. And like you were saying before, I like that the rate is not the rate that they will fund is not, it's almost impossible. It's impossible. Atlantic County, you cannot find anything under 1,400. Go even in Atlantic City, the small studio apartments are charging $1,200-$1,300 for like nothing.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, how's your experience like in Cape May? Because we serve Cape May as well, and especially now, you can't find anything. It's Cape May. It's super expensive, and during like the season, nothing. So I was wondering if you had any luck ever down there.
Very, very difficult.
Yep.
So it's just like we're trying to find those like connections and use, you know, some of the established relationships we already have to maybe find other ones, but it's still really, it's just difficult right now altogether.
Yeah.
But again, going back to, I think that initiating that beginning of building relationship, it depends on where they're coming from, and it really stems off of like being professional, being upfront, trying to find what's best with the clients, and so that, you know, we can move forward in that process. But yeah.
So, Talia, I hate to say that up where we are in Middlesex County, it's hard to find a 1-bedroom for less than 1,600. So, yeah, exactly. But is anybody, one of the things I want to ask about this when it comes to building relationships, I'm just thinking about my experience in supportive housing. And most of the time, the staff that we have working with individuals to find housing don't have their own housing, i.e. they're living with their parents. They've never signed a lease. They've never done any of these things. So what does the training look like for staff coming in terms of how to do these things?
Well, I can say we've had that quite a bit, and I know I keep on going back to Miami, but that's actually where I had it the most, because a lot of the culture there is that you live with your parents much longer, and maybe until like you get married, especially like the girls. So it was like especially with the shelter plus care, like there's a lease. The Miami-Dade County, it's held the shelter plus care, and so shelter plus care Miami-Dade County had its own lease, and so we would actually teach them. We have folks read over the lease and explain to them what a lease was. Like, and these are like adults, these are full like grown adults, but they have never done it. And we look over and we kind of like, this is teaching, like this is how you do it, and have them review it almost like bit by bit. That way they know some things, like, you know, if you break a light bulb, you have to replace it. It's not going to be the landlord. You know, if you break your refrigerator, not that it goes bad, you're responsible for it. Like these kind of things. Like, no, you're not entitled to a laundry, you know, to wash your dryer. So it's just to learn how to read paragraph by paragraph. And typically I would sit with that person and just review it with them, and then maybe just go along with them to meet the landlords a little bit in the beginning. Again, it was very different relationships that you have in Miami, which a lot of it was very break. It was so informal and you got a lot of work done. Here, people already know, we've had a lot of people out in the field already, but it's a very similar, like, here you go. And we have a housing specialist as well on the team. And then that with a new person, say, let's go over a lease. And so this how we have it a process here. So if the lease is violated, this is what can happen, and we have like a housing specialist go over with that person. And we, you know, we're partnered with CEC, our sister organization, with housing, and they're great. They're always answering questions for us.
Awesome.
So communication.
I also see in the chat, Aubrey put, we developed a moving coordination plan. I really wish you could speak, because I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about that, what it entails. You know, is it a checkoff list? Is it, you know, something that is kind of an interview questionnaire that's done with the person before you, you know, begin to look for housing? If you can, type a little bit more in the chat box, but I'll turn, just looking at the time, I'll turn it over to Leslie to continue.
You're muted, Leslie.
And I said something very profound that I can never find the words again to say, and we all missed it. So I apologize about that. You would have had the meaning to life, but I was on mute. So no, one of the things we wanted to talk about was things that staff need to consider. And you know, one of the more important things about, to me, on this list, which goes back to something we talked about in the first session and something Adriana mentioned today, is being out there with the consumers, and how do we explain our relationship with the consumer to the landlord, right? You know, of course we coach our consumers in terms of how they dress themselves when meeting a landlord, but how are the staff dressed when they're out with the consumers, right? it comes across as, it screams I'm a worker if I'm wearing a shirt and tie and my consumer is wearing jeans and a t-shirt, right? So what are some of the considerations that might not be up here that everybody else thinks about when it comes to working with staff and finding appropriate housing for the consumers?
Just tell me to be quiet. I'm talking too much. I'm trying to wait to see if anyone else goes first. I really am. I'm trying to let someone else go first. I don't want to be a jerk. We found that it depends on the situation. Because again, if the landlord a little bit, if we heard anything, if it's a really big building place, we have found that like a lot of the smaller mom and pops place, they're going to end up asking about us anyway. We want to look a little bit like sharper, a little bit well put together. Doesn't have to be a shirt and tie kind of thing, but just like what they would consider respectable, depending on who that is. The bigger buildings, like we never want to go slovenly, obviously, but a lot of the bigger buildings, we try to just be a little more casual because it might ask for like less questions and make it less obvious. It's more about, all right, do we have concern? And again, this is not to sound disparaging, but if we know the person served may not present as well, or may have some issues, or something may happen right there, then we do want to look a little bit more like professional, because I think it gives confidence to the landlord. I said, okay, because, all right, so and again, I'm not trying to sound disparaging, but it's going to be like, yeah, I know you guys are not pals. So then you're the person I'm talking to. I want to know that, you are like professional. I mean, and it's, I know it's outward, but it is kind of what we do for the most part. No one is like, I mean, I'm pretty much the only person who runs around in heels here, but that's because that's me. And I would go and do that anywhere, but it's also how we present ourselves as in our personality. We don't go like, yeah, I'm so-and-so, like, I'll be very, very chill. Might be in heels, but I'll be very, very chill kind of thing. We present as very personal and on that same level.
Adrienne, I think you made a great point. Like, it does definitely become obvious, right? That I think we all work with individuals that range on a spectrum, right? We all have, in all of our agencies, we have the consumers that the layperson would never know, right? And we have the consumers that the layperson would absolutely know, right? And so, especially in those circumstances, most of the time I coach staff to sort of match the consumer, to look as unintrusive as possible in these kind of situations. But when you have the long-term person with schizophrenia that is poorly maintained, and they are experiencing auditory hallucinations around the clock, and their hygiene is poor, and all these things, and everybody deserves housing, everybody deserves adequate housing. But in those situations, it's probably better to be more dressed up, right? It's better to have your ID prominently displayed, right? To say, yeah, no, this person is not going in here without support, right? They are coming with support. What about when it comes to disclosing information to the landlord, right? Because we always have these circumstances where the more experienced landlords, the questions they ask are, where's the money coming from, right? And if you can give them a satisfactory answer on where the money's coming from, they really have no further questions, right? Or the less experienced landlords are like, they still want to know where the money's coming from, but then it's, what is their diagnosis? Are they crazy? Are they going to hurt? Like, how do we handle, or what are some tips on handling how to respond to those questions for staff? Anyone?
Well, our first response is, you know, and it's just so general. It's HUD pays for it. HUD. As we explained, you know, it's kind of like a Section 8 voucher. It's HUD. You know, it's coming something like that because most people know HUD. And so that's like an easy, like, oh, okay. So HUD pays for it, like a Section 8. Those are words that people know, and a lot of them will be, that's just fine, okay. And some of them may, okay, well, which, you know, they're a little more savvy, okay, which type of voucher? Another easy one is like, okay, it's, you know, such a generic term, like it can be like, oh, a shelter plus care voucher, or, you know, we got it, you know, from the county, you know. So let's say it's a division voucher, you're not lying, it is from the county. So, and that just seems a little bit like less scary for folks. If they start asking some more of those questions, you know, we'll say we just kind of answer it vaguely, and unless that person with whom we're with there, if they say, yeah, they'll answer it sometimes, like, yeah, well, I have depression. And those, you know, that has happened. I have, when asking certain questions, it's kind of depending on, and this, you have to be relatively skilled for it, but sometimes people are asking, and the way they ask is not like, well, you know, what's your diagnosis? Like, are you going to go crazy? It's more like, oh, yeah, so what's your diagnosis? Because my mom, and there's some of that. So we have to take it very, very carefully. It all depends, again, on how that person wants it. We typically do not discuss the diagnosis, and then they'll say, oh, what's the diagnosis? Like, well, you know what? Right now, we're just going to talk about the housing. We're just going to talk about the leads and some of opportunities. And then, you know, we go further down, you know, we can talk about some other things. It's kind of try to deflect a little bit, and try to focus just on that housing. But, and again, I'm just going back to like just my formal, and so like enmeshed that, like, oh yeah, because my mom was like that, and this and that, and it actually brought the people closer together. So it's like one of those fine-tuned, you have to read it. But here, I think in our environment here, it's mostly like, oh, what's the diagnosis? No, we're just going to talk about the apartment if that's okay, in the most diplomatic manner possible, because you don't want to, like, if this is a good place, you don't want to let it go. Mind you, listen to their tone, because of like, oh, what's the diagnosis? You may not want that person with because you don't know what's going to be coming down the pike. So again, this comes with experience, and that's what we try to to our newer folks coming in.
Yeah, I think that avoiding the self-fulfilling prophecy is important, right? You know, if you can tell the landlord or whoever it is you're meeting with has this preconceived notion of what a person with a mental health condition is or will be, you probably don't want to even put the person there, which becomes another consideration to go back when we talked about the lack of availability, right? At what point, you know, one of the things that I'm thinking of now that staff have to consider is, at what point do we put someone in a less desirable situation because that is the only situation available, right? Like, you know, I try to make sure that we don't put anyone back at the building where the property manager was buying crack. But if if that's the only place, right? I mean, if we're talking about someone who has bipolar disorder and they have just completely destroyed their credit because of the poor financial decisions associated with that disorder, or someone who may be on Megan's Law because they were participating with a command auditory hallucination, or any of these things, right? At what point do we say, you know what, the property manager smokes crack, but it's a house? Talia's faces are wonderful. But it is a real consideration that we have to think about, right? Like, so does anybody have a hard stop? Like, we're not putting a person here under any circumstances whatsoever.
And I'll add on to that. Do you have that like, has your hard stop like changed now considering all of the issues with finding housing? Like, was your hard stop maybe one place before the pandemic and now like, you know, we're still in it, but we're kind of moving away from it? Is that hard stop now even like further back?
Oh my gosh, there was a time, imagine this, when we cared about the full quality of life. Remember that? When we wanted someone to live in an affordable housing, near transportation, near the community, near their place of worship, near the family. That was like, and nice and clean, where they had all that stuff. That's what we did. And if it wasn't there, we would move right on, move on, move on. And if the landlord was just not that nice, move on, and we would put up the whole battle. What do you mean you're discussing discrimination? Oh, good golly, not anymore. Now there's some folks who go into neighborhoods that we would never have thought we would say, you know, okay, now we're like, well, don't want it, but it's better than living at the bus stop, kind of a thing. So yeah, it has changed. As far as a hard stop, I mean, it would have to be a deplorable type of situation, like a deplorable apartment, not just like it needs some repairs. I mean, because I don't know about you, but if something's like, well, yeah, well, this faucet is like still running, and I don't know about that, we would not place the person there. I don't care about a leaky faucet now. You turn the water comes out, and it's clear. I'm happy. So we have changed a lot. Again, if it's deplorable, no, obviously. If the person is like really, really like just like disparaging and cruel kind of a thing, you know, no. I mean, I don't want to use the word ignorance, but we know there's people, there's stigma. We know that there's situations. Now we got to deal with it to different degrees. So we will handle it like, oh yeah, well, I don't want to have a crazy person living here, but it's a steady paycheck, so I'll take it. We would have put that person there before. No, probably not. But now, probably. So big time change. We just need people housed. When we have, I still can go over have people with vouchers living at a shelter. So, yeah.
You know, Aubrey types in the chat that their hard stop is if the location is dangerous for client and staff safety. You know, I definitely agree with that. I think that one of the experiences I had years and years and years ago, I had just started working with the drink center after working in a methadone clinic in Spanish Harlem, right? I spent years working in methadone clinic in Spanish Harlem. So I come down, I'm hired as a case manager, and the supervisor is like, oh, you know, I don't know if you want to go to this neighborhood. It's really dangerous. And I'm like, do you know where I used to work? Right? Like, Pemberton? No, okay. So I think one of the considerations is we're worried about staff safety, as we should be, but are we considering staff comfort in that? Right? Because I remember going into this neighborhood and, you know, it was widely for the area considered a pretty bad neighborhood, but I was fine. And the consumer really appreciated me being able to not be scared out of my mind coming into his apartment, and actually developed a really good relationship with me. So I think that is another consideration to take.
Yeah, I'm a little curious, especially like what Audrey was saying. So what you had said, Audrey, was definitely how we've always done it. Like the rule was, if I'm not comfortable going in there, we're not going to place that person there, because if I feel uncomfortable, then now with reason, of course, because some people feel uncomfortable almost anywhere. But, and I'm curious now, Audrey, have you like changed at all, or if others, like the question was, have you changed that? Because now, like I said, there are some places where I would feel uncomfortable, but they are living because there was no other place.
So I think, yes, there's been a change for sure, but I think there's a lot of power in the client's hands too, and with self-determination, like what they want, what they feel comfortable in. Because a lot of the clients that we have are from, like, there's some not so great places in Atlantic City. But when they're from Atlantic City and they know, they grew up there, they know where's the right areas, where's they're not best areas, and they feel comfortable there and they're okay with that. You have to respect that. So
That's a great
maybe
point.
I
That's a
wouldn't,
great point.
it's like I wouldn't personally maybe live on that corner or in that particular block. But if they're comfortable with it and they want to move forward because they're in a hospital, they don't want to be there any longer, they're on CEPP status, they have to move out, or they're in the community and they're homeless and this is a housing opportunity. They're not under the boardwalk, they're not on the corner, they're not at CVS. They have a potential for living with a roof over their heads. Maybe not again, my personal reflection, but that's my personal reflection. That's not theirs. So I think that we take that into consideration. And again, self-determination. This is what they want. This is where they're trained to go. This is, and they're okay with that. Then we have to respect that too. And the fact that they may not want to wait another 6 months to a year to find something that eventually pops up.
That's a really great point because, and this is not related to the individual living in like a potentially unsafe area, but I received a referral from one of the hospitals for an individual when I was working in Union County. And that man wanted to live in Monmouth County. He was from Monmouth County. He had previously lived in Monmouth County. He wanted to go back to Monmouth County. And within 6 months of him being there, he voiced his frustration every single day about having to live in Union County, having to live in Elizabeth. He hated living there. He was miserable. It took an impact on his mental health. And he ended up like leaving. He just kind of left and they ended up finding him, guess where? In Monmouth County, where he wanted to live. So I 100% agree with you. Like really respecting the individual and what they want and where they want to live is paramount, really, because I think the consequences of having somebody living someplace where they don't really want to live, it's not worth it to that person.
So I'm going to go over just briefly some information related to maintaining relationships with landlords. It was mentioned earlier, communication is key. First off and foremost, communication is key. Maintaining open lines of communication with the landlord, of course, respecting HIPAA and other regulations related to privacy for consumers and tenants. But having that open line of communication with the landlord is really important to maintaining it. Also, shifting in terms of services, once you've had someone housed, shifting your focus to working with the person, your tenant, the consumer, and ensuring that they understand what it means to be a tenant. Part of that requires education, not only about their rights as a tenant, but also about the lease itself. It was mentioned a few moments ago that they need to be able to understand the actual lease itself. And it's really important to understand that there's also, while there might be a standard lease form that someone can pull off of Google, and a lot of landlords have very specific leases with very specific provisions or addendums, and that may not be actually in the physical lease, but addendums that are attached to the lease. So you want to be able to get a hold of the actual lease document, the full lease document that they're signing off on. It is a legal document. They can, go to court for it. There are some states, specifically like I live in Pennsylvania, but I work in New Jersey. In New Jersey, they do have landlord-tenant rights where a landlord doesn't have as many, it's really tenant-friendly state. So as a landlord, you don't have many rights in terms of being able to kick somebody out. It's really about rent or them doing something crazy in the unit that, endangers the welfare of others. So you can put all the provisions you want in your lease to try and control your tenant, but they still have to go through to a judge in order to be told they have to leave. In terms of their rights and protections, it's also important to kind of use the resources that may be available in the state. HUD has some resources available related to tenant rights. Sometimes it's a local HUD office might have it, the regional office, or here in New Jersey, the Department of Community Affairs actually publishes a tenant, a truth in renting guide for all tenants. In our lease, we do require that the tenant receives a copy every time they renew their lease, so they have to review it. I don't go through every single page of it because it's like 80 pages long, something like that. But it has a lot of resources and information available to them. But that's where it becomes really crucial for helping to maintain these relationships with landlords, because if you're helping the tenant to abide by their lease, you're helping them to understand what their rights are as the tenant in that property. It makes it easier for them to not violate their lease and cause issues with the landlord. And then you don't have to be the go-to or the in-between mediator, if you will, when issues do arise. And then also teaching some advocacy skills and advocating for the individual is really important. And one of the things that you can do, a lot of states have legal services available for tenants, and they're free or really low cost if the individual is low income. And just being able to connect them with those type of resources allows them the opportunity to advocate for themselves, but also, kind of go through some of the legal ramifications of not abiding by not only the lease, but just, their rights as a tenant. And so those are some of the things you should do to maintain relationships with landlords. But as I said initially, communication is key. Being able to keep an open line of communication with that landlord. If there's a problem or issue, they know who to call or who to talk to at the agency to be able to get the assistance or work with them really quickly. Earlier today, I was talking to one of our subsidy providers, and she told me, no disrespect to Ccc, but it's the first time she's had like really good communication with a person at the agency when it comes to addressing issues that come up between us as the landlord and them as the subsidy provider, and being able to address not only issues that we have when we don't get paid for rent for something, or we got paid rent for 3 tenants that are no longer with us, but we're really communicative with them about issues as they arise and trying to get them resolved as quickly as possible. So being able to maintain those relationships comes down to really communication at the end of the day. Anyone have any kind of tidbits that have worked for them in terms of maintaining relationships with some of the landlords that you may work with to share?
I think it's just a lot of what we've spoken about, like once we establish a relationship, maintaining it, like checking in if need be. Sometimes it's because it causes less issues, less questions, but if we have a good relationship, just checking in, mainly to say, don't forget we're here. If you have any questions, any other open apartments, call us. Yeah. Try to keep like centered to that person, but also just like generally.
Any other tidbits anybody may want to share about how they help to maintain their relationships with landlords? Feel free to share in the chat as well.
One of the ways I maintain a relationship with a couple of our landlords that have multiple of our consumers is try to set up like a bi-weekly meeting with them, just to go over the tenants to see if there's any issues that have arisen in the last 2 weeks. I'm doing that now with 2 of the landlords that have a lot of our consumers and multiple of their properties, and they kind of enjoy it. So they know that there's a definite day that they'll be able to be in contact with someone to discuss issues.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. Because that really keeps the line of communication open.
Yeah.
Who's in the meeting? Like, who would be in that meeting?
Usually it's myself, I'm the supervisor of the program, and the landlord. If there has been like a particular issue with a tenant that, a lot of our landlords, they try to help us, like help the consumer to resolve the issue without having to send warning letters and things of that nature. But if we try and we're not being successful, then we'll schedule a time where we bring the consumer in, the landlord, myself and the supervisor, and we'll review the issue and try to come with a resolution for all that's involved. But just usually the bi-weekly meetings, just myself, the property manager, and the supervisor.
Very neat.
We do something similar with where we provide services on site with a couple of our developers. We'll have monthly meetings. Part of it's contractual, but also part of it is trying to maintain those relationships, and especially dealing with tenants who become or get behind in rent. We try and provide services to help connect them with resources in the community to help them. And that's not just for our folks that are receiving actual services from CCC and our special needs populations, but we actually provide services quite often to the general population in those developments, folks who may be living in affordable housing but just need some assistance from time to time. Any other feedback, thoughts?
I think one thing that we do that I really like is if we have like the bigger agencies or people that we're working with, having or establishing that one point of contact. So knowing, okay, if I have an issue with this or something else is going on, or there's that one person that we have established as this is our point of contact so that we can have that flow of communication. So I think that's pretty important, is having that point of contact with each, if it's not like an individual landlord just kind of doing it off the side, but if it is like an agency like Bandy, or it's a different property group that's doing it, having that one person. So we know we can email them and they can email us. We also do meetings with them, and we do them with consumers when there's issues too, so that everybody's kind of on the same page and we can kind of resolve prior to like a cease order happening. But I think it's really important to have that.
Thank you all for your feedback. Emily, I don't know if you're next.
Yeah, so we're just about at time. So here's the evaluation in the chat box. I will also put the evaluation in the follow-up email that I'm going to send everybody who attended today. But we didn't want to just leave you with conversation. We wanted to give you some resources. So we have some tips for supportive housing staff. This is from the HUD Exchange Housing Search Assistance Toolkit. There's tons of great information at HUD Exchange. But this is a specific PDF document that's on tips for working with landlords. And this has some great information for your direct care staff on how to, communicate, work with landlords, maintain that relationship, maintain that engagement. This is a really interesting article from Forbes on 5 tips on building better relationships with renters. So this is from the landlord perspective. So if you own any properties, this could potentially be helpful for you. And it also might be helpful if you don't own any properties, maybe how to, kind of bridge the gap and look at things maybe from the landlord perspective, which could potentially be helpful. And then we have some information that's tips for renters. So we have some 12 tips for being a great tenant that landlords love, the WFLP property management, how to be a good tenant, and then the Truth in Renting Guide for New Jersey. I don't know if any of you have used this before, but this has a lot of great information for the individuals that you're providing services to on what their rights are, and really what it is to rent a housing unit in New Jersey. So this also has great information. So I'm going to just stop recording.